wakes up each day with a fervent passion to advocate for women who suffer from sexual abuse, harassment, or discrimination. As a lawyer with 21 years of experience, she has recovered millions of dollars for clients in cases involving sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, and wrongful termination. Alreen has an unwavering commitment to not allow wealth, power, influence, or status to exempt anyone from the rules of society. Oh my God, that's such a breath of fresh air. Alreen's father was a terrifying presence who subjected her to sexual, physical, and verbal abuse. Despite knowing her mother remained silent, darkness loomed with Alreen, leading to depression and multiple suicide attempts. She remained quiet out of fear and shame, never telling a soul. Typical victim behavior, she says. Motivated by the pains of her childhood, Alreen became a lawyer in order to stand up for victims of abuse. She founded her own firm. Okay, we practiced Haeggquist. Did I say that right?
Yep.
She founded her own firm, Haeggquist, in San Diego. Oh my gosh, you're here in San Diego, California, in 2008, which has helped hundreds of other women stand up for themselves. Alreen has changed high-profile entities, including the Salk Institute, Trader Joe's, Kaiser Permanente, the San Diego Sheriff's Department, and a president-elect. Alreen's core message is that as a society, we need to break the silence and help women stand up to their abusers. In 2023, she broke her own silence and published her story in the book, Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma. Alreen, thank you so much for joining us. I am so super excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, what did it take for you to actually break your own silence?
So, I mean, it took a very long time. My abuse by my father was when I was at a young age. And it wasn't, until like over 30 years later that I came out with my story and had it come out. And what it took is the realization of how it was affecting my relationships and my well-being by holding it all inside and not saying anything. The only person who was continuing to hurt was me. And so when that realization came, and there was little steps, right? Like you start journaling and it starts coming out in that way. But having it come out in a story was as a result of my journey to heal, realizing by having it come out, writing a book was the only way I could share with other women about how empowering it is when you no longer keep it silent.
Yeah. Alreen, your story is incredibly powerful and so inspiring, like so inspiring. I can't tell you, as a therapist, I have a lot of clients. We can totally collaborate. We can talk about that offline, but I'm going to tell you right now, I have a bunch of clients that 1,000% need your help. Getting through one thing is them even asking for help and coming to therapy, which is not easy at all. And then in addition to that, opening up about their trauma, processing through their trauma and getting that therapeutic help. One area that I see a lot of my own personal clients get very much stuck in the beginning is they don't want to file a claim. They don't want to file a claim. And, I can think of a couple where, well, nobody's going to believe me, or I was drinking. So because I was drinking, the investigator is saying that, is this a boyfriend? Is this somebody that you were interested in that denied you? And then you guys had sex and, now you're upset about it. Like all of these triggering things, all of these things that should never be said, to a victim of sexual abuse, a survivor of sexual abuse. It's really, really, there are times where I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to say this out loud. And as a therapist, like knowing my place, knowing that I can't be the one to guide her into what I want her to do. And instead really, really be that provider, and guide her towards what she wants. But yeah, I mean, we could probably speak for hours about injustice. For you, you seem so passionate. How did your own experience shape your path to becoming a lawyer and founding your firm?
So as you mentioned it when you did my introduction, growing up, my father was abusive in all the ways. And my mom, who knew about it, didn't say anything. So one, like I could never be like that. So from like a conscious level, I
Yeah.
could never just be quiet, right? Watching that and wanting her to say something and her never saying anything. I didn't want to be that way. And
Can you
also,
can you elaborate a little bit when you say she knew? What did she know?
I mean, she saw it happen. She saw us get abused and she didn't say anything. She supported him. And in my mom's defense, right? Like I have empathy for
Yeah.
my mother. She had an arranged marriage when she was 17 years old and my dad wanted a lot of kids. So she gave birth to 10 kids starting at the age of 17, So
Yeah.
I have empathy for her. And so she didn't know how to voice her opinion or how to even stand up to him.
Yeah.
And when I was a child, I thought she was one of me, like in the sense of my dad was abusing her too, and there was nothing she could do about it. But as when I had a daughter, I think that's when I was angry at my mom, just because protecting your kid is just so natural. I think it just happens naturally. I don't think it doesn't
Yeah.
require work. And so the fact that she didn't do anything to protect us, and it's not, I'm the youngest of 10 kids. There was 5 other girls before me, and and for her to see it happen and not say anything and still defend him, right? For her litmus test that he was a good father because he gave us a home and he didn't kick us out, right? Because we were girls.
Yeah.
And so for her, well, that makes him a good man, and that's hard to swallow. The other part of it on a conscious level is, I saw my sisters get abused, right? I saw other family members get abused by the hands of my father, and I didn't say anything. I stayed silent when I was a kid. And so on a conscious level, I've never been able to keep my mouth shut because of that as an adult. The other part of it is on the unconscious level, right? The triggers that come up. So as a kid, I never said anything. I just took it. I was a scared little girl and very, I was terrified as a kid.
Yeah.
And very sad. I would say I was just constantly sad, right? When I would pray, my prayers would be, let me just be happy and be out of here,
Yeah.
Very simple. And so as I, got out of the house, I got out of the house when I was 18 and I was just angry. Like I would just pop off and be angry by things that I didn't even know it was making me angry, but I still assumed it was the person, it was the situation, it was the external factor. I didn't connect it to the fact of that was all of these repressed feelings that I never, got out when I was young. And so when I was able to identify the fact that I had triggers, I was able to realize where it was coming from, I was able to take more control of them. And now I'm able to use those same triggers and that same passion and that same anger on behalf of my client, not as an angry person, but just as a really passionate advocate for people who suffer abuse at the hands of people that think they have power over them. And so that's what makes it different.
Yeah, I love that you clarified it. It's not emotionally driven. I feel that same way with the patients that I work with, having experienced some childhood trauma, and being able to relate with them. And there's this level of understanding. It's different when you can tell somebody, but when you have actually experienced some of maybe the issues they experienced growing up in childhood, when, you can relate with, in my case, my dad was a heroin addict, an alcoholic, and a hardcore gang member. And so dad was very dismissive of my emotions, and, we didn't really have a relationship. But when, looking at the mind of an addict or looking at that relationship, when my patients are, processing through their own pain, there's, I'm not going to say there's all of these similarities, but there is this unspoken connection. You can say something to somebody and you can do your best to understand it. But when you've actually experienced it, there is true understanding. you know?
Yep.
So I love that you clarified that, just because there is a difference in being able to provide, to find a professional, that has that love, that empathy and understanding, right by your side. It's invaluable. It is invaluable.
Yep.
Many of our listeners have faced their own traumas and struggles. How did you find the strength to overcome the darkness of your past and channel it into your work?
So it wasn't linear, right? You don't go on this like
No,
linear path. You're
no.
like,
I
okay.
wish it was. Gosh, I wish it was.
But my past started having an effect on my relationships. It had an effect
Yes.
on my relationship with my husband, because the person that got, the bulk of my triggers, and who I was most angry with was him. And I've been with
Yep.
him now for, it'll be 28 years, and we've
Oh,
been married.
congratulations.
Thank you. And we've been married for, it'll be 22 next month. But, over a decade ago or 15 years ago, it hit a tipping point, because I needed to get control of how I was treating him. And we started going to couples counseling, which I was really annoyed by the fact that we had to go to couples counseling, because I thought it was his fault,
Yeah, duh.
that we were there.
If I'm coming, you better tell him why he's all the things he's doing wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't need to focus on me. I'm perfect. But
what I learned, and what he was able to get out that he had never told me before, was that he was afraid of me. And that really, I feel like that moment was really pivotal for me in my life, just because I was always the one that was afraid. And so to be that person to somebody else was shocking to me, because I couldn't even see myself like that. And so for somebody who loves you that much to be able to say that, it really started bringing an awareness inside of how I was behaving. Yeah. Still then I didn't, right away go to start therapy, but then I had my daughter, and that was another part. Like, I wasn't able to experience her as a baby, as in a child, and enjoy the joy that I think childhood has with her. And that's what got me to start going to therapy. And I think through therapy is just the awareness, the recognition of where these things were coming from, was able to allow me to channel it differently and on behalf of my clients. Kind of like when you're in it, you don't realize like where it's coming from. You kind of need a therapist like yourself, like, to help you process what's going on and where it's coming from.
Absolutely. When you said, when you gave that, your husband's response of him being afraid of you, like as you shared that right now, you can see that light bulb going off in your head, like, holy moly, wait a minute. For so long, I've been afraid to know that I've been invoking, like, this emotion has been a product of my behavior. Again, we don't see it because that's not our intention.
Right.
It's not our intention. Our intention isn't to hurt anybody. If anything, we're attempting to protect even more. Yeah. Especially when we haven't necessarily healed it. We go into compromising ourselves to protect others, and I'm so glad you were able to actually hear those words and allow them to kind of sit, sink in and marinate a bit. Mm-hmm. And I can totally relate with you. When something said, I wish I had the ability, and I do have the ability, but maybe I wish I had the patience or understanding or vulnerability to actually hear something and then make the changes right then and there. Right. But I tend to be a little bit stubborn, and it's like, oh, okay, well, really? Let me go ahead and make a little bit of tweaks, right? I mean, it can't be that bad. Yeah. It can't be that bad. Totally. So your, what advice would you give to women who are currently feeling stuck in their pain and don't know how to move forward?
I mean, I kind of feel like step one can always be like, why do you want to not be stuck, right? Why do you want to be in a different situation or feel differently or get out of the situation you're in, and kind of put your eye on that, right? So for me, it was, I wanted to have a better relationship with my husband. I didn't want him to be afraid of me, and I wanted that to come out. I wanted to have this relationship with my daughter. So they became my focus. Now it's really me. After you start feeling it, you start kind of chasing that high for yourself. But at the beginning when I was stuck, right? Like, and it's really hard when you're highly functional and you're doing well, right? Because it's kind of like, well, I'm a lawyer. I live in San Diego. I, got out of that situation a long time ago. Stop complaining. Like, get over yourself. Things are good.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Right?
Check it off the list. Yeah.
We're done.
We ain't got time. We don't have time.
Yep. And so that's what you want to do. And so it's you're upset with yourself for being stuck, right? Like, you kind of like, you have no reason to complain. You have no reason to be stuck. You have no reason to feel sad. You're feeling alone for no reason. And so you kind of need to stop that. Like, it is, you're feeling a certain way. So accept that, have the awareness of that, and then focus on why you want to have it be different. Right. And for me, it was my husband and my daughter. For somebody else, it might be something different, but focus on that and then start taking steps as to doing something different. And there's not like this like guidebook, like if everybody follows these 10 steps, you're going to be unstuck and you're going to live this, incredible life, but you have to do something, right? You can't just be there and say, oh, okay, well, I want it to be different and therefore it will be. It requires some work and effort. For me, my first step was seeing a therapist. And the first time I saw a therapist, I thought same thing. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to see him 4 times. I'm going to tell him my problems. I'm going to tell him I was abused as a kid. He'll fix it. I'll move on.
Yeah. I love that.
And I still see him, just saw him yesterday.
Yeah.
So, it's a constant because things continue to come up and it allows me a place to kind of process the information and what's going on with me. So that's what I would tell women, is to kind of figure out like why you want it and then continue to focus on that.
That why is really important, because that why is going to go ahead and start to create some level of action. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of women, they'll start the therapeutic process, they'll open up, and I have never been in the system, right? We're understanding like the whole process of, the DA, the detectives that do the interview process, and what this whole process entails. And the constant interviews have been such a huge trigger for a good amount of my patients, just because it feels as if they're lying. All of this questioning, it feels like, okay, well, this person thinks I'm lying. I have a lot of, especially teens, that are just like, okay, well, they think I'm lying. I'm not lying. And as a therapist, and then processing through, listening to those incidents, it's like, you're not lying, but that feeling, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be questioned anymore. And I've already been questioned this much. And now to be in front of, maybe a jury or in front of a judge, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to go through this process. And now another thing that comes up for a good amount of my clients is, there's two sides to it. And I'd like to get your feedback on this. A lot of my clients, they will have parents where their parents say, well, wait a minute, you didn't tell me you were drinking. So now that I know you were drinking, and now that I know you were drunk, or now that I know this, like, you did do this, like, you're just trying to go ahead and get out of being in trouble for drinking, or on the flip side, you'll have parents where it's like, okay, well, I can't push them to have conversations with the investigators. I can't push them, if the investigator says that the case is, I don't want to say null and void, but out the window because there's not enough evidence. So you have this kind of like, you have these parents that are like 1,000% ensure fault. Then you have other parents who are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do to help you. And so can we get some of your expert help with this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge problem, right? With the investigations and people doing interviews, is you're re-traumatizing the person that's already suffered extreme trauma, right? By the way you're questioning. Why were you there? Why were you drinking? Why did you wear that? Why did you go there? Why were you out at night? Why did you go in the room alone with him? You're right. It's all these why questions. And it makes you feel like you're on the defensive already, and it makes you shut down. The other part of it is having to continue to tell your story. And when you've suffered trauma, you don't tell your story in this linear fashion. The pieces don't come to you on this beautiful chronological timeline. That's not how it works. People get pieces in fragmented pieces. But if you don't understand that, if you don't understand that's how somebody who's experienced trauma tells a story, then you're questioning now, same thing, can re-traumatize them by like, well, you didn't tell me that before. Why did you leave that piece of information out? You left that out, and that's because you're lying or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So at our firm, we don't do criminal work. We do all civil work where the standard is lower. It's a lower burden of proof, but we have a trauma-informed advocate on site. So she not only helps us as lawyers do better questioning, so we never re-traumatize our clients when they come in. And so she trains all of us internally, but then she's also there for the client because she's gone through the process herself, to make sure they feel heard, they know they're believed, and that they're supported, because litigation is hard, right? Even if we're not making them feel that way, the party on the other side, when they start doing their questioning, can do the same thing. So what I tell people? I think you can have, even in these criminal investigations, you can have a survivor advocate on your side that is trauma informed, and the DA's office provides it. But you can also have like a civil law firm that's representing you, like our firm would have that support for you. And I think that's really important, because it's another reason why I wrote my book. I mean, I think these women that come forward and go against their accuser or their abuser are so brave for telling their story, right? I understand it.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, they are so brave.
Yes.
And representing these women, like when they were telling their story and then being cross-examined about it, I was like, I need to do this too. Like, I need to see how they feel and go through the fears, of coming out, right? But they're so brave for coming forward, and I know they're scared, but that's why it's so important to have like a team, have your people, right? So you don't do it alone. And I think when you're going through it, you do feel all alone, and you're so worried about what people are going to think, and people aren't going to believe you. But if you have a team of people that do believe you, who are there to support you, who do understand you, I think that really is really important as you navigate both the criminal and civil, or either one.
Yeah, 1,000%. Your core message is about breaking the silence and standing up to abusers. Why do you think it's so important for women to share their stories and seek justice?
Because by staying silent, what I had mentioned to you earlier, the only person you're continuing to hurt is yourself. Like it's you. It's you. It's just going to continue to eat at you, right? Like, even though you want to forget about it, you want to pretend like it didn't happen, you want to push it aside, you want to move on with your life, and it still remembers. Your body still remembers. It's still there. Your body
doesn't forget.
Your body doesn't forget.
Not forgetting.
And so it's going to continue to affect your physical health. It's going to continue to affect your mental health, and it's going to continue to affect the relationships of the people you love until you break your silence. And you don't have to come out with the book. You don't have to put it out in a book to everybody, but you can't just keep it to yourself and pretend like it didn't happen. Right. Even though you want to, like, that's what I wish more than anything. I wish I could take a pill and forget about my childhood and pretend like it didn't happen. But it wasn't until I accepted what happened, when I started, journaling
Keyword
it.
Right there, ladies. Accepting. Love it. Sorry.
That's okay. It wasn't until then that I was really able to heal from it. I mean, I've done, as part of my healing journey, the other piece of it is I've been doing inner child work, or I've done inner child work to take me back to the place of being abused and how I felt during that time. And even though that sounds horrible, like, who would ever want to do that? The whole point of that is, until I feel those feelings, I will always hold on to them. That's the way to release it. And so that, to me, is really, really powerful. So that's why I'm on such a mission to get women to stand up, because I believe by doing it, that's really how they're going to move to the next level and feel good about where they're at right now.
How can women find the courage to speak out, especially when they fear retaliation or feel ashamed?
So, courage, I always feel like it comes from necessity, right? Like, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like, I didn't come into this like, oh, I'm going to be really courageous and tell my story. It came out of necessity. It came out of wanting to do something different for the people I love and for myself, and to show my clients, like, I understood where they were coming from. And so when to find the courage, I think you have to find your people. You need your team. You don't have to do it alone. And so this idea that you got to have courage and it's got to be all by yourself, that's just not true, right? Like
No.
there are people that are going to support you. It might not be the current people you're around, right? Like sometimes
Yes.
like there might be family who's not supporting you in the situation, or your spouse, or whoever it is. But if that's the case, then find another support group, because I promise you they exist, right? Like, and so I think to have the courage, you need to get people to support you. It's like kind of like having the tribe, right? Like your peeps or your group or your friends, whatever it is. And so I always think like having a therapist, the lawyer and the law firm that's behind you, friends, a spouse. Some people go to church, they might have like people from church or the priest. And it's just having a support system as you go through it. I think really does give you the courage to keep going forward, because the fears are going to be there. I can't say they're not, right?
Absolutely.
And some of the fears might come true, right? Like you might fear, oh, this person won't talk to me anymore. That might happen, right?
Yeah.
But the consequence of not saying anything, I think, is much worse, because again, the only person that is hurt by not saying anything is you, right? And so you're making a choice for yourself as opposed to protecting somebody else.
Yep. For women who are currently dealing with harassment or discrimination in the workplace, what are some practical steps they can take to protect themselves and seek justice?
So, one, I always recommend that people say something, right? Like the company or somebody can't protect you if they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so that's what I always first say is like, you should at least report it internally. And if you're having a hard time doing that on your own, seek advice of a lawyer of how best to handle it. It's illegal to get retaliated against, right? They can't do it. Doesn't mean they don't, but it is against the law. And so I think knowing your rights and knowing what you're entitled to and what should happen in a workplace is really powerful. So that's what I always recommend, is at least report it. And if you're going through it, document what's going on, like keeping notes of what's happening. If you're not ready to report yet, then at least send an email to yourself, recognize what's happening, and keep that for yourself in case later on you want to report it.
Absolutely. What resources or support systems do you recommend for women who are just beginning their journey or to healing? So you mentioned therapy, you mentioned being able to, it might not be the people in-house that you're currently around. It might be other people. How do you go about hiring an attorney? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, I always think if you're wanting to find an attorney and you don't, first I would try to get a referral, right? If you know somebody who's gone through it, asking them who they went through and what they thought. If you're doing a search on your own, you're trying to find a lawyer who, same thing. I think it's really important for them to have a survivor advocate, somebody who's trauma informed.
Yes.
So that when you go in, you're not being re-victimized. Somebody you feel comfortable with, and you can read. I mean, now everybody's bios are online, and somebody who doesn't have like a huge caseload, right? If you're going to a lawyer and they have 100 cases, like that's not going to make you feel great when you go in, because that's just too many clients for them. So I think finding a referral if you can, if not, doing a search on Google to try to find somebody that you trust, asking your therapist if you've seen a therapist, they might have a good reference for you. I think those are great ways to find somebody. But with respect to like what steps they can take, I really do think journaling is powerful, even if you've never journaled.
So powerful.
If you just start writing down, what happened or what's going on inside you, I really think it does move the needle, even if you don't have a therapist, even if you don't have a lawyer. It just helps you move the needle forward.
In your book, Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma, you share your personal story. What was the most challenging part of writing and sharing your story? And what has been the most rewarding?
I think kind of reliving everything. And again, I kind of go back to, that's how my clients feel, right? Like when they have to go and tell their story to the investigator, and then maybe a jury, and then the lawyer, and all these different people, and they got to keep telling it. And it's like, you relive it. Every time you tell your story, you have to relive it. And so that was the most challenging, I would say, during the process of writing it. And it's, we were talking about earlier, it's, you don't think of everything in this like chronological line. Different memories come up as you experience or you talk about one of them, something else comes into mind. So that was all challenging. It was some that I hadn't thought about for a long time or hadn't felt for a long time. The most rewarding has really been this weight that's been lifted. So every time I retold my story, it got easier. It becomes, even though it's, the life that I lived, it does become easier. And it just feels like the weight continues to be lifted and I don't have to carry the burden of this secret, right? It was always this secret that people didn't know about me. And now it's like, well, there's really nothing else I can share. This is it,
Mm-hmm.
So it feels very light. And so I would say that's the most rewarding. And then of course, the women that I think I'm helping as I tell my story and they who, tell me how I've helped them has really been rewarding and reconfirms why I did it in the first place.
Can you share a success story that particularly stands out to you and demonstrates the impact of your work?
Sure. One of my clients who stood up to the San Diego Sheriff's Department, and this is, it's her, but this is kind of a typical story, I would say, which is when the woman first walks in, they are so scared for the reasons you identified earlier, right? Nobody's believed them. Like coming to me is really usually a last resort.
Last resort.
People aren't trying to find lawyers.
Yeah.
They are really trying to figure it out themselves and how to work through it and navigate it. But by the time they come to me, people have not believed them. They've kind of been gaslit to thinking like they were the problem.
Yep.
And got themselves into it, or they're making something a big deal that shouldn't be a big deal. And so she was another example. She brought it against the Sheriff's Department and she was scared. The Sheriff's Department wasn't believing her. They weren't taking any action, weren't doing anything. And, we went through the whole case. We went through trial. And at the end of it, she just felt so empowered. Like now she knows she has a voice. She can use it. And she should be believed. And so when somebody's not believing her, it's not her fault. It's their fault for not doing it. So that to me is a success story. And that's the success story I want to see in every one of my cases is, turning somebody who's afraid and doesn't feel like they have a voice and there's nothing they can do to the opposite of that, where they realize how powerful they really are. It's just, they weren't, they just were doing it alone. And now it's like, I don't have to.
I think it's also not even having the tools, not knowing what the other side looks like, and feeling as if, okay, I have all of these people that are saying, and they're all professionals and experts that are saying they don't believe me. So if it feels like I have to convince them, and if I can't convince them, what's going to be any different from an attorney? An attorney wouldn't take my case, and that's the whole mindset. So I love the individuals that you have. Your entire team is really laser focused on providing, your clients with the best level of care and coming from this place of compassion, which you don't see a lot. You don't see a lot.
Yeah.
What final piece of advice or encouragement would you offer to our listeners who are struggling with their own battles and looking for hope?
I always say, don't wait. Take some action now, take a step now, do something different now. If you've been in the same circle and you're wanting something different, you're just going to stay in the same circle. So you got to move outside of that. And so I always say, do it now. Today's better than yesterday.
Absolutely. Is there one, one lesson from your book that you can share with us?
A lesson from my book that I can share. This is something that really impacted me. There's another light bulb moment that we talked about earlier, but the light bulb moment for me, we get in our negative self-thoughts and the thoughts that we can't do it or we're not deserving of it or it's not going to happen, whatever it is. I think learning that I can change my thoughts. That was a light bulb moment.
Huge.
Change my thoughts and I can change my entire experience that I'm having today was really powerful. And the work that I did there was with Joe Dispenza and the meditation surrounding his work. But I think there's others you can find. But that's really it, really reprogramming your brain so you have different thoughts. And if you have different thoughts, then everything looks different.
Yeah.
So I say that to me is a great lesson. And I think all of us can benefit from.
I love that. Love that. Where can our audience find more resources to connect with you for further support?
Sure. I have a website. It's called Alreen, ALREEN.com. And I'm on Instagram as well. So those are great places. And then my law firm is haelaw.com if they're looking to file a claim.
Heck yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Again, thank you for having me.